Hey everyone, today I'm taking a look at something that I'm very excited about, the Asus Rampage IV Extreme. Those of you who watched my Singularity Beast upgrade video series have probably guessed that this is the board that I'll be using in my new big build that I'm doing. I'm building another primary system for myself and I'm planning something epic. So this board has socket 2011 and the X79 chipset. It's the next extremely high-end top-of-the-range platform from Intel. The X58 platform reigned supreme for an incredibly long time. I think it was nearly 5 years. Okay, it's time to have a look around the box. Okay, socket 2011, the X79 chipset I've already mentioned. Those are the CPUs that the motherboard supports. NVIDIA SLI. Now something very cool about this motherboard, and this is a first on Rampage motherboards, it actually supports full NVIDIA Quad SLI, which means 4 discrete graphics cards, 4 separate GPUs, and that's because the X79 chipset actually gives enough bandwidth to support this, and it also supports AMD Crossfire-X. The X79 chipset also supports Pci Express 3, which means that when PCIe 3 graphics cards are released in the future, you'll be able to get double the bandwidth on the PCI Express 3 slots. Also, something very obvious that I forgot to mention, this motherboard ships with a copy of Battlefield 3. Now looking at the back of the box, you can see an image of the back I/O panel, some specifications. Now the OC key, I'm going to talk about this when I have a look at it shortly. VGA hot wire. You can plug in small wires into the motherboard and solder them onto the back of certain Asus ROG high-end graphics cards, and it allows you to change the voltages on the graphics cards accurately within the BIOS. Sub-zero sense. I'm pretty sure this is the first board with temperature sensors on it which are capable of reading sub-zero temperatures. So this is for dry ice, liquid nitrogen and liquid helium cooling. X socket. This allows you to use a socket 1366 CPU coolers on socket 2011. So yeah, if you owned a socket 1366 board before this, you can use the same CPU cooler on this board. The board also has a 3-year limited warranty. When you open up the box, there's a window into the motherboard just there. USB BIOS flashback. Now this is very cool. This means that you can put the BIOS on a USB stick and even flash the motherboard's BIOS when there's no CPU or memory plugged in. GPU DIMM post. What this means is that you can actually check the status of the GPUs and memory in the BIOS if there's a problem with it before booting into the operating system, and instead of getting blue screens and errors in the operating system, you can check it in the BIOS. Voltminder LED 2. Now I'm pretty sure this is a feature that I remember on the Rampage 2 and Rampage 3, where there's LEDs for the memory, the CPU and a few other different components on the motherboard that tell you which component is being polled, so that if you have problems during post, you can watch the LEDs light up, and whichever component the LEDs stop on, you know that that is the component that's causing the problem. ROG iDirect. This gives you access to BIOS settings and monitoring through your smartphone, so you can connect via Wi-Fi or Bluetooth and download the smartphone app, which is similar to Turbo V, so it gives you access to overclocking settings, frequencies, voltages, also fan RPMs and temperatures. ROG Connect. This allows you to do the same or similar thing with your laptop, so you connect via a USB cable, and again you can access software similar to Turbo V for overclocking and monitoring. 4-way SLI and Crossfire-X. Okay, I've already mentioned most of these things, but I'll just pause on each of them so that you can read the write-up if you want to. X socket, sub-zero sense, VGA hot wire, Now, OSD monitor is actually part of the OC key, which I'm going to talk about when we look at the OC key itself, or when we're looking at the accessories. OSD tweakkit is also part of the functionality that the OC key gives you. Extreme Engine Digi Plus 2, Japanese made 10K black metallic capacitors give you apparently up to 5 times longer lifespan than normal solid state capacitors at an operating temperature of 105 degrees Celsius. Just have a look at the huge amount of accessories here. This is one of the ways of knowing you've got yourself a premium motherboard, and it's something that you always see with ROG series motherboards. Here we have the ROG Connect cable, which allows you to overclock, monitor temperatures, voltages and fan speeds via a laptop. So you plug this into your laptop, plug it into a dedicated port on the back of the motherboard, and install special software on the laptop which allows you to do all of that. The back I/O panel, a whole bunch of Sata cables, so Sata 3 with right angles on one end. We've got 4 of those, and we have 4 Sata 2 as well. Now this is the OC key cable, and it plugs into a USB midboard type header, and it plugs into the side of the OC key. The OC key plugs into your graphics card, into a DVI port, and then straight into your monitor. So you just plug the monitor DVI cable into that end. There's a USB port in the OC key, and that's for updating the firmware. Now what this does is it brings an overlay up on the screen, and it's basically BIOS settings, so you can change voltages, frequencies, whether you're within any 3D application or on Windows desktop. Mid benchmark you can bring up the overlay and start overclocking, and it's direct access to BIOS settings. You don't need to install software, and you will certainly be seeing this in future videos, so keep your eyes out on my channel. So yeah, that cable goes with it. Okay, next up we have a quad Sli bridge. First time I've seen that with a Rampage motherboard. Very exciting to see. So it's black and it has all the logos stamped on it, SLI, Asus and Republic of Gamers, which is great to see. Try Sli Bridge, SLI bridge, nice big long one, in black instead of brown, and Republic of Gamers logo stamped on it. And also a Crossfire X bridge. Here we have a Republic of Gamers badge, so you can stick that on your case. Battlefield 3 key, so it's a full copy of Battlefield 3. We have a whole bunch of manuals by the look of it. ROG Connect manual, Sonar audio card, which, oh no, this is a product catalogue, I'm sorry, yeah, of course. Motherboard manual, looks like I've got this all upside down, but anyway, I've got a driver's disc in there with a ROG sticker. Just give you a look at that. And a whole bunch of stickers here for labelling cables. So you can see the picture there, that's what they're used for. And there's all the stickers there. And a quick start guide. Finally we have a Battlefield 3 lanyard, ROG Probit cables. Now I'll show you where these plug in when we're having a look at the motherboard, but basically they plug into the motherboard and you use a multimeter to pick up accurate readings of voltages when you're overclocking. You can also touch them directly onto the motherboard, but yeah, you've got these as well. Q-Connect, so yeah, these are on all Asus or most Asus motherboards. Just make it easier to connect front panel cables. and this is the X socket. So it basically changes it to socket 1366 mounting system, so that you can mount your socket 1366 CPU cooler. I also got this, which was stuck in the front of the motherboard box. It just tells you to be extremely careful with the socket pins on the motherboard. Don't touch them with your fingers, and also don't drag the CPU across the pins when installing it. Line it up first and then drop it into position, because damage caused by any of these things is not covered by a warranty, so that's something you want to be careful about. Okay, now it's time for a close look at the motherboard. Don't worry, I will give you a good look at the motherboard as a whole once I've given you a detailed look around the board. Now, I just cannot believe the sheer amount of overclocking and LN2 features on this motherboard, and I'm sure you'll be surprised as well. So first of all, starting in the top left hand corner as usual, you can see a 4-pin PWM fan header. Below this is a small button. This is the Q reset button, and it temporarily cuts power to the CPU for when you experience a cold bug. So basically it's to help bring the CPU back from a frozen condition. That's what it says in the manual. And it's for when the LN2 mode jumper fails to work. I'll talk about the LN2 mode jumper shortly. To the left of this you can see a small header. Now this is for an optional extra, and it's basically a button on a wire, and what it's for, it performs the same function that the lower button does just there. So not that reset button, but the one below it, and it's to enable and disable ROG Connect, specifically to enable and disable the OC key. So the optional extra and that little header is just to bring that closer to your operating area, your keyboard and mouse. I'm not sure how long the wire is or anything like that, but it does go through the back I/O panel and plug into that header. And I'm pretty sure you can pick it up from Asus. To the right of the Q reset button, you can see another small header. This is it's a temperature sensor header, and it's the operating temperature 3 header. There's 3 of these on this motherboard. Moving across the top of the motherboard, there's the CPU power connectors. So we have a 4-pin ATX 12V connector and an 8-pin EPS power connector. Moving across, there's the CPU fan header, which is another 4-pin PWM connector. Moving across, there's another fan header. Next to this is the debug LEDs, which post error codes when there's problems with the motherboard. Below these is a small switch for slow mode. Now, on this motherboard, slow mode is not what it has been previously. So I'm coming from the Rampage 3 Extreme, and on the Rampage 3 Extreme, slow mode was for QPI slow mode, but with this new architecture it doesn't have a QPI anymore, so it's for something different. It's to do with using LN2. The higher the frequency of the CPU, the more sensitive the CPU will be to fluctuations in temperature. So what this small switch does is, like when you finish benchmarking, okay, the CPU goes from very heavy load to no load and it's idling. So what happens then is it gets very cold very fast, and that fluctuation in temperature, you know, when going from heavy load to no load, often makes the system crash, because as I said, the higher the frequency, the more sensitive the CPU is to changes in temperature. So you lower the frequency, it becomes less sensitive, and the temperature change is not such a problem. To the left of the slow mode switch you can see a header. This is the LN2 mode header. What it's for is getting around cold bugs during post. Below these you can see a start and reset button. I really like the look of these buttons, they're very cool. They're also in a very good spot up here next to the memory, which is an accessible position. Below these we have the Pci Express lane on-off switches. Those of you who watch my Singularity Beast upgrade video series probably remember when I had the faulty video card. Well, the Pci Express lane switches on my Rampage 3 were absolutely invaluable in diagnosing that problem video card. I mean, look at that, water-cooled video cards. Just imagine one of them dies and you don't know which one it is. You might have to pull out all three of those cards before you find it. Having switches like that means that you can, it's just the flick of a switch. It looks like there's LEDs next to the Pci Express lane switches as well. So you can tell which one is on and which ones are on or off. Okay, next to those, almost on the edge of the board, we have a bunch of small plugs. And if you remember when I showed you when we were looking at the accessories, I showed you the ROG Probit. So this is where you plug them into the board and use a multimeter to accurately read voltages. Okay, you can also see to the right of those voltage read points where you can actually touch a multimeter directly on the board. Okay, between the voltage read points are LEDs, and it was slightly confusing what these are actually for because there's two different sets of LEDs for two different things. These ones are the Voltminder LED 2, and what they are actually for is when the system polls each voltage, it checks if the voltage settings are okay. If they're not, the system will get stuck on one of these LEDs, and whichever one is lighting up, you know that that's the problem LED. So I'm just trying to get in close to show you the labels of each of these LEDs. Some of the labels are also for the voltage read point. Now moving down next to the 24-pin motherboard power connector, you can see more voltage read points, and I'm just trying to get close so you can see the labels, and also more LEDs. Now these LEDs here are different. These are for when the system polls the memory, the CPU, and a couple of other things during post. And if there's a problem with one of these components, it will get stuck on one of these LEDs, and you will know which component is the problem component. So it's just a way of diagnosing what is stopping your system from booting. You might be getting no signal to the screen, and that's something that's quite hard to diagnose sometimes. It could be you might not know whether it's the CPU, memory, or graphics cards, or motherboards, or the motherboard, but these LEDs can help you diagnose that. Okay, between the start and reset buttons and the memory slots, you can see a bunch of headers. So there's 5 headers. These are for the VGA Sense wires to be plugged into. So this is for the wires that go from the motherboard to certain high-end ROG series graphics cards and enable you to change voltages on the graphics cards accurately within this motherboard's BIOS. This motherboard supports up to 64 gig of quad channel DDR3. Now it says that it takes up to 2400 megahertz memory, but with BIOS updates it will no doubt take higher frequency memory than this. Okay, so 64 gigabytes, that is absolutely incredible. So that would be using 8 gig sticks. So it has 8 DIMM slots. Okay, the go button actually has 2 different functions. You can use it as a memo K button. So memo K is for when the system fails to boot due to incompatible memory settings. You press this button and it will set safe settings for the memory. The other function it can be used for is a preset overclocking profile. So basically you can set this up in advance to anything you want, and you hit this button and it will load that overclocking profile. So next to that we have another 4-pin fan header, and moving down you can see the 24-pin motherboard power connector. Okay, moving down we have another 4-pin fan header. There's so many of them on this motherboard, which is just awesome. And you can see a small header above that, which is another temperature sensor header, and this is operating temperature sensor 1. Next to that is a midboard USB 3 header. Okay, moving down you can see the Sub-Zero Sense, and this is where you plug in the temperature sensors. Okay, now for a look at the Sata Port configuration. So we have 4 SATA 2 ports in black, and they run off the X79 chipset, and we have 4 SATA 3 ports in red, 2 of which run off the X79 chipset and 2 of which run off an AS Media controller. The same AS Media controller also runs 2 eSATA 3 ports on the back I/O panel. Moving down, you can see another button. This is for switching between the 2 BIOSes. Here we have the front panel connectors and another midboard USB 3 header. The midboard USB 2 headers, we've got 2 of them there. Another 4-pin fan header, and you can see the 2 BIOS chips just there. Moving across we have another midboard USB 2 header and another 2 4-pin fan headers. This is for an incredible total of 8 4-pin PWM fan headers on this motherboard. That has got to be a record. Here we have the front panel audio header and also an SPDIF out header. Okay, moving up the left hand side of the board. So I'm just going to move up slowly for a detailed look. Okay, here we have a 6-pin PCI Express power connector, and this is for extra power to the video cards, to the PCI Express slots. Next to that we have something that I didn't notice before, and yeah, at first I was wondering what the hell it is. It's actually a floppy power connector. So that is yet another power connector for extra power to the PCI Express slots. So very interesting that they included a 6-pin PCI Express connector and a floppy power connector. And to the left you can see the OC key connector. So if you remember the cable that I showed you with the OC key that plugs into the side of the OC key, that's where it plugs in on the motherboard. And there's a spot for it to go through just there, and there's also a spot for it to go through the back I/O panel. Okay, moving up from there you can see a heatsink. So all of these heat sinks, I suspect, are cooling power delivery components. So you can see a heat pipe actually interconnects all of them, and it looks like a 4mm heat pipe. Another big heat sink just there. Those of you who are observant will notice that I've had to film this part later. There's already some water cooling parts in the system. But anyway, this heatsink here is cooling the MOSFETs, and we have a heat pipe extending down to this heatsink here, which has a nice Republic of Gamers logo on it. And moving down to the X79 chipset heatsink, which has a small fan. Now I've heard that this fan is quite loud, and I mean these small fans usually are very loud because they spin at a high RPM and they usually have a horrible whine to them, so it's a bit unfortunate that they put a fan on this motherboard because I don't really think it's necessary. But you know what this motherboard's designed for is extreme overclocking, professional overclocking and liquid nitrogen, so I guess it's necessary if you're going to be doing any of that. I'm going to be water cooling this board. I'll be putting a water block on it anyway, so I don't really care about the fan. I'm looking forward to seeing how they're going to design the water block for this motherboard, considering the amount of heat sinks on it and you know where the power delivery components are. There's obviously going to have to be a couple of separate water blocks, which is going to be very cool. So there you go, there's the cooling system for this motherboard. Let's move on to the Pci Express slots. So one of the very cool things about the X79 platform is that it has far more PCI Express lanes than ever before. So it actually has 40 PCI Express lanes. So starting from the top, I'm going to list the PCI Express slots, how they're wired. So we have at the top a PCI Express ×16 slot, then a ×8 slot, then another ×8 slot, which is the black one. Then we have another PCI Express ×16 slot, then a PCI Express ×1 slot, and then another PCI Express ×8 slot. Okay, I can't go through all the different graphics card configuration possibilities, but consider how the slots are wired, and consider that there is 40 PCI Express lanes in total, and you can see how the different configurations will work. Now another feature of X79 is PCI Express 3. What this means is that when PCI Express 3 devices are released, you'll be able to get double the bandwidth in these PCI Express slots. So all the red slots and also the black ×8 slot are all PCI Express 3 slots. Okay, all the red PCI Express slots as well as the black ×8 slot run directly off the CPU. The ×1 slot runs off the X79 chipset. So just a bit more of a look around the motherboard. Here we have the CMOS battery. Moving across, you can see a ROG chip of some sort, probably a dedicated overclocking chip. I'm not going to go over every single chip on this board, but yeah, just trying to give you a bit of a closer look. Okay, I'll give you a bit more of a look after, but now it's time for a look at the CPU socket. So this is socket 2011, so it supports any socket 2011 CPU. Only two have been released so far, the 3960X and the 3930K. There will be more to follow. So it's a huge socket, as you can see, and it has two hold down bars on either side. We've got one here and one here. Now looking at the back of the motherboard, you can see that the heatsink on the X79 chipset is screwed on, which is to be expected on such a high-end board. More screws for the other heatsink, and we have cooling backplates on the back of these heatsinks, which shows that there's definitely power delivery components there and also there. So those backplates, as well as giving some extra rigidity and stability, also give some extra cooling. So you'll probably find there's some thermal interface material between those and the motherboard. Now it's time for a look at the back I/O panel. Starting from the left, we have a combo PS2 port, two USB 2 ports, a reset button, the ROG Connect button, which I've already talked about, three USB 2 ports, and the dedicated ROG Connect port. Then we have the Bluetooth, two more USB 2 ports, an eSATA 3 port which runs off the AS Media controller, a gigabit LAN port, two USB 3 ports, another eSATA 3 port which runs off the AS Media controller. Then we have another two USB 3 ports. So all of the USB 3 ports run off AS Media controllers. I'm not sure exactly how many. I think it's 4 off each controller. So there's 4 on the back panel and 4 on the mid board. We then have the 8-channel audio, which runs off a Realtek ALC 898 chip, and also an optical SPDIF port. Okay, I better wrap the review up there. There has been an incredible amount of features to cover. It's been a very long review. Make sure you check out the build log for more details on the motherboard. There will also be performance results and temperature results and overclocking sessions, and I'll be showing the features of the board in action, like the OC key. Just one more little thing that I forgot to mention. This motherboard has a Uefi Bios. So I hope I've covered everything. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, like and favourite if you want to see more. Thanks everyone.